Here we are, walking through Paris. Oh, God. I can't count how many times I've walked down this quay.
Do you think you'll still be walking down it in a number of years' time, or is there no thought of that?
I don't know. I feel like as long as I'm alive, I'll come back to Paris periodically, and maybe my story will take me somewhere else, but I'll probably always want to come back here and visit. Yeah, I love this city. It has kind of gotten its hooks into my heart. Yeah, you were asking earlier about like whether it's affected my writing, and I was thinking about that. And, I think Paris has a history of respecting the arts as a valid thing to do with one's life, as an important thing to do in the community. And like I was talking earlier about, like feeling that responsibility that if people endorse your efforts as an artist, to try to grow as an artist and to try to be better and to try to work harder. And I think when I was a kid in the States, I didn't really think about that at all. I was just like, I just thought like all you had to do was kind of like grow your hair out and smoke a joint and get some leather pants and be a rock star and be cool, and everyone's an individual man, and everybody should be famous or something. And but living here, I guess I kind of got the idea in my head that in Paris, they take care of the teachers, and they take care of the train drivers, and they take care of the dock workers, and on some level they take care of the artists. But you're seen as part of the community. Like even if you are this kind of fringe poet who lies around on the riverbank drinking wine all day, you're seen as like a part of the machinery of Paris. You're seen as playing a necessary role, and you're expected to play it well. And people have known a lot of fucking wine drinking expat poets in this city, and they expect you to be good at it, and they expect you to give a shit, and they expect you to show up for work, and you gotta try. It's not just like you got a rich uncle and so you're famous. It's like people want to test whether or not what you have something to say that's worth hearing, and people want to know that you're busting your ass. People want to see the pages. In America, when people ask you what you do and you say I'm a writer, they go, oh, do you make any money at that, or oh, do you work at a restaurant, or oh, have you written anything I've heard of? Are you famous? All that kind of nonsense. But and someone in Paris asks what you do, and you say you're a writer, they say, great, show me the stuff. What are you writing? What are you working on? They want to see it. You have to show them pages. And if you don't have any pages, you're bullshit. You're just some American tourist or something. They want to see the pages. They want to see it. They want to hear what you're talking about. They want to know if it's any good. And if you've got 500 pages on your desk, you get a little bit of respect. I used to sleep under that bridge over there, the green one, when we were just walking by when we were talking. When I first got here. That summer that Jesse and I went swimming in the Seine, I was living under that bridge for a little while. I had learned from years of experience that first of all, something always comes along when you're in a jam. And second of all, that even when it doesn't, a night in the train station or a day spent sleeping in the park is never as bad as you abstractly fear that it will be. Leslie was starting to understand those things too, but the transitions would still put her on edge. In March of 2004, we were staying in a cheap hotel in Paris, down to our last few euros, and we were getting close to rejoining the homeless population. Leslie was getting nervous. So I proposed what I always thought, and what I still think is appropriate to do in such a situation. I suggested that we go down to the pub and start investing the meager remnants of our finances in some beer and conversation. Leslie thought I was nuts, wanting to waste both our precious time and our humble coins in an afternoon at the bar, but there was a method to my madness. When you're down on your luck, it's important to be visible, especially in places where you're a regular and the familiarity of your face has accrued a bit of sympathy and goodwill. When things aren't working out is when you most need a favor, or the flash of inspiration that you might get from meeting someone new or overhearing a conversation, and you're not going to get that sitting in your room and counting your pennies. When you have a good-sized chunk of money, it might be worth saving, but when you only have a few bucks, its greatest value is in the chair time it can buy you at the watering hole. I finally talked Leslie into it, partly because she didn't have any better ideas, and partly because I would have gone down there without her if I had to. We went to an old favorite bar on the Rue Mouffetard, where I knew the owner from my younger days. Leslie and I had frequented the place before and had reason to hope that we might run into an old friend, or meet a new one, or otherwise catch a lead on a place to crash. This is the place.
Fifth bar?
The fifth bar, yep. And this is where we met our friend Mark, and that's where the story goes on to talk about how we found a little tiny little room because the guy we met here that day, and we've been surviving and off the street ever since. So this is my place. This one of the famous little tiny apartments of Paris. And we got this tiny little place right next to the trash cans where the posts are now. Leslie, better half. Hey, honey. We're showing David and his viewers our famous tiny little apartment where we've got everything we own on these 6 shelves. We've got 9 square meters, which is, I guess, what is that in like 90 square feet or something?
2 feet by 2 feet.
Yeah, I don't know. It's here I am like touching almost all of it. Whatever that's my math. I could probably do that actually with like a foot to one wall. Yeah, I can actually. So I can touch. So it's less than 6 feet or something.
It's right in the centre of.
Right in the center of Paris.
Of the Latin Quarter, yeah.
Absolutely, and dirt cheap, and we can walk everywhere, and so we're happy to have fewer things and have more freedom. So that's what we're doing in this little place, where you're welcome to come in for a cup of coffee. He's cute. He's not even ours. He just likes us better than his family. So whenever our door's open, he comes over here and hangs out with us. We don't even feed him. It's just a totally social relationship. He's just befriended us. Yes, he sleeps here almost every night. Okay, are we ready? So this is a little bit about the little apartment. One of the great things we had going for us in Paris was the network of tiny little romantic apartments all over the city. They're generally referred to as chambres de bonne, or maids' quarters. Most of the older buildings in the city center have these small rooms which at one time were the sleeping chambers for the domestic help employed by the residents of the larger homes. They're often located on the top floor, cut off by the slant of the roof, and generally under 100 square feet in size. In fact, many of them are too small to be legally rented as living spaces under Parisian housing regulations, but this also makes them cheap. Unlike the housing in New York or London, where anything even remotely near the city center would cost thousands per month, these romantic little rooms scattered throughout the very heart of Paris can often be had for as little as a couple of hundred. So there's a thriving black market through which they are rented, exchanged, and acquired. They're prized by artists, writers, and students as an affordable way for the less affluent among us to bed down in the city of light. And because they're in such high demand, if you want to hear about them, you have to be plugged into the network of expats and starving artists who pass messages about these places along a hidden grapevine, like the keepers of a secret handshake. And we found this place on that grapevine, and we used to live in a place even smaller than this that had been owned by a German guy named Jan, who had killed himself because he was struggling with a combination of mental illness and poverty. And I wrote this piece largely about him and what it was like living in his place and moving from his place to here. And we still have some of his stuff, like this cutting board came from his apartment, and there's sort of a mention of that at the end of this piece. So I'm just going to read one last paragraph from the book, and then I'll leave off. When the time came for the new owner to move in, it was Chris who found the lead on our next home, a tiny little top-floor, slant-roofed room in one of the old buildings on the Ile Saint-Louis in the middle of the Seine. The night that we moved there, we walked the whole way across town, carrying with us a pile of the essentials we'd adopted at Jan's place. The little cutting board, the knife with the broken tip, the slotted wooden stirring spoon, as well as the cassette tapes and the chessboard. These things all followed us into that next little room we lived in, and then the next one after that. Chris kept the place on the island for a while, but Leslie and I eventually moved on to another chambre de bonne back over in Hemingway's old neighborhood off the left bank where we still live today. And still every night when I cook, I use those kitchen utensils and think briefly of Jan. I try to remember with every meal I eat that we live on a fringe, a precipice, a cliff, where sometimes there's only space for us because someone else doesn't get that little bit of luck and decides that it's easier just to leap. To anyone who's living like a dog in Paris tonight, I hope you catch a break. That last line's a reference to Jan's suicide note. He jumped off the balcony of a neighbor's house, and before he jumped off, he left a piece of paper on her kitchen table that said, in Paris we live like dogs when we should be living like kings. And that always kind of stuck with me, and so I thought of him when I was writing that piece. Some of the things that you and I used to argue about, I think about, I think in a more evolved way because of your influence. But also I think that I go through waves in which sometimes I'm more or less comfortable defining myself in opposition to things and to other people and to ideas different than my own. Sometimes it means a lot to me to take up arms and sort of be against something or define myself as different from something. And other times I get much more interested. I go through waves where I get much more interested in what we all have in common. So you can't just keep convincing people over and over that they need the newer, better TV, the newer, better phone, the newer, better T-shirt, the newer, better toothpick, the newer, better milkshake, dispenser or whatever, and think that that's going to provide entertainment and satisfaction and purpose and money and employment and sustenance to like a population that doubles every couple of decades. So the thing is sort of bursting at the seams, and critical thinking is kind of antithetical to the model, because critical thinkers don't buy Coke, they just drink water, and they don't buy bottled water because they realize that if you're thinking critically, bottled water doesn't make any sense. So the more informed the public at large is, the more tenuous the kind of the consumerist life model becomes. And so I think that the powers that be have every reason to discourage critical thinking, which is why the political interests that are in bed with big corporate lobbies are usually on the same side that wants to defund education.
It used to be seemingly so easy, didn't it, that if you wanted to find something out, then you could have a fair idea of where the source might be, where you might find the information.
Right.
But with the web seems to have confused matters somewhat. It's very difficult. So how would one begin to think critically?
Well, it's interesting you should say that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that the internet theoretically should make critical thinking more possible for more people than it's ever been before, because there's access to such a wealth of information. I think the key to critical thinking is balancing opposing viewpoints, like we used to do in debate club when we were in school, where they'd sort of draw lots or take straws out of a hat, and you'd have to argue either for or against the death penalty, or for or against abortion rights or something, and you wouldn't know going up to the stage which side you were going to have to take. You'd have to have prepared for both. And the internet makes it possible to do this, because you can avail yourself of opposing positions to a level of deep detail on any issue, and if you do that, you'll refine and hone the ability to judge viewpoints against each other, and to find where there's more weight and merit on one side than the other. The problem is in the way that people use the internet now, and the way they're encouraged by a lot of media corporations to use the internet, which is to narrow the scope of the information they take in and customize it so that they're only receiving news from their own side. So you can control your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed or your Yahoo feed or your Google Plus feed or wherever you're getting your information. You can silence all the posts or all the posters who disagree with your worldview. And you can create a feed for yourself that totally customizes your experience so that you're only hearing things that corroborate and bolster your previous point of view, and that doesn't improve your critical thinking skills. If you want to really win an argument, you have to know how the other person is going to frame their argument and where they're coming from and be prepared for it, the way an attorney would be. But we don't train ourselves that way anymore, even though we could. We can use the internet to get both points of view and weigh them, but we don't. And I think ultimately it's because companies like Facebook and Twitter, they want us to all be having a positive experience. Like the last thing in the world Zuckerberg wants is if I go on Facebook today and have a bad experience, and then I go walking around telling my friends, oh, it was shitty being on Facebook today, my feelings are hurt because so-and-so told me I should get an abortion or stop eating meat or something, and now I'm all pissed off and I'm having a bad day, so tomorrow I'm not going to go on Facebook. And I see this happen all the time where my friends say, oh, I'm quitting Facebook because there's too much drama and people hurt my feelings, people judge me, whatever. And so Facebook wants to make it easier for us to go on there, and as do all social media platforms. I'm using that example because that's just a very successful company.
Yeah.
But key to their success is they want us to be able to go on there and have a totally positive experience and come away going, hey, I spent 13 hours on Facebook today and all of it was daisies. I learned cool stuff and I talked to cool people and I heard my favorite song and they advertise jeans that are only my favorite color, because the ads are tailored to your interests. And, like I say, I don't like this ad, I don't like this ad, I don't like this ad. And after 6 months, all I see is ads for like rare Doors albums. And I'm sitting there going, whoa, I love the Doors. This is really cool. And I'm just helping them, rope me into a completely narrowed and tailored experience of the world I want to see, which makes it harder for me actually to think critically about the world outside myself or put it into any objective framework. You look at social media platforms in general and you'll see that they're trying to sell a product which is our platform is the cool place to be, the interesting place to be, the good place to be. And so they don't want people having mixed or double-edged experiences or negative experiences on the platform because they don't want the negative publicity for the product, and the platform is the product. So I think the most important thing we can do is be aware when we're shying away from contentious debate or when we're shying away from engaging opposing viewpoints in public or on social media, to understand that we're actually doing that to behave cooperatively for the benefit of a product that's for sale, for profit on the marketplace. And we're participating in a corporate mission statement by comporting ourselves that way. And that might make us reflect a little bit on where we shy away from opposition and contention.
I see. A final question on this point of critical thinking. So if you could name a couple of writers that one would read to help with critical thinking skills, where would you point people?
Oh, I would absolutely point people to the dialogues of Plato, which really he records the conversations of Socrates essentially, and the position that Socrates took in every conversation was, I don't know anything. And when somebody else knew something, he'd ask them questions until they didn't feel like they knew anything anymore.
I see.
And when they asked him for a replacement, assertion, he wouldn't offer any. He'd start off with some question like, what is truth or what is beauty or something, and just carry the other person to where they didn't know anymore what truth or beauty was. And he'd say, great, neither do I. And he would just leave it there, rather than trying to impose, some kind of an answer like Aristotle and, all the posts, the later Western thinkers. So yeah, those dialogues really helped me a lot with that, as well as Michel de Montaigne, wrote a lot of really introspective essays about just trying to find the trajectory of his own ideas without imposing an end point or a target on them.
Okay.
And I think that's really sort of going into your questions, hoping that they'll stay questions, or hoping that you can destroy answers and create more questions, rather than hoping that you can narrow your questions by turning them into answers. I think if you take that attitude, you can make a lot of progress. And I think Socrates and Montaigne, were two of the great thinkers in that regard. Well, David's not in Paris very often, and so he's asking me, where do you like to sit? Where do you like to hang out? And these sort of pits with the stone benches along the side of the Seine here are where I like to come sit and read and write and watch the world go by and turn my answers back into questions and read my Montaigne and, write my essays and stuff. So I thought this would be a fun place to come talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, good idea.
So these little mini kind of amphitheater seating structures along the water here, we call them the dance pits. At least the English-speaking locals call them that, because they're all summer long. They have dance lessons in these pits every night, and each one has a different kind of music. So there's salsa dancers here, and hip hop dancers there, and tango dancers, down the way, and in the warm evenings in the summer, you'll see thousands of people down here just drinking wine and beer and watching the dancers, listening to music, watching the boats go by, and it's kind of a beautiful place to be on a warm night. So this is a piece called Nocturne. It's part of a project where friends of mine gave me titles to write pieces in response to, and my friend Mark, who was the guy I met at that bar, who helped us find our apartment here in Paris, he gave me the title Nocturne. And I was right over here. I was just a couple of feet from here, sitting on the riverbank, thinking about how to write that piece. And it was a beautiful sunny day, a little bit like today, but even warmer. And I was trying to think how to write a nocturne. What is a nocturne? And I was thinking about nighttime and daytime, and I'll read you the first paragraph of it, just because I was sitting right here when I wrote it, and I couldn't help thinking of it. I was sitting on the quay the other day, in the sunshine of a summer afternoon, watching the beautiful Parisians arrive along the Seine with their picnic baskets and bottles of wine. I was basking, feeling peaceful, digging the warmth of the sun on my face and the magic sensation of being sustained and nurtured by the universe. But then it hit me that the light of day itself is the blinding illusion, the thing that fosters all our silly, self-important human arrogance. When darkness falls, it may be harder to see some things, but it's easier to see the great big truth in the sky, how small we all really are in the grander scheme. In the daytime, it looks very much like there is one tremendous sun that hovers in the sky just for us, keeping an eye on our health by making sure we have just enough warmth and light, like the keeper of a delicate flower bed. But at night, we become tiny, helpless, insignificant. We can suddenly see that there are hundreds of thousands of suns, and that the entirety of what we know about accounts for a submicroscopic portion of what's really going on out there. I used to sit on the Seine here every day and think about questions like that. Think about how these people can come and go with their picnic baskets, and how this beautiful blue sky is actually just this tiny snow globe shell that sort of blocks our vision and blocks our minds from accessing the immensity of what we're tumbling through. But then the sun goes down and the stars come out, and you see that all the little things we do, the stuff you're asking about, the job, the security, the health insurance, the apartment, I write books, or I'm an athlete, or whatever it is that I do, is tumbling through this void where there are more galaxies than we can even count. And every little thing you have in your pocket, your little phone, is just flying through this frigid black void of thousands of billions of light years of of vacuous space, and there are more suns than we can even count, than science can even count. And I guess that helps me in some way, because when I access that level of terror, I realize that everybody's got the same one. You know, it's like when you've got the terror of poverty, or the terror of cancer, or the terror of your girlfriend leaving, or whatever is, maybe that's your own little personal terror, and it's hard to see it as the same as your neighbors. But when you look up in the sky and you see that fucking shit, we've all got the same terror, and that makes me feel a little bit better about things. Yeah. Absolutely. I like watching the people wave at the boats wave at the people.
What matters to you at this moment? What matters to you? Like, for instance, for me, what matters, I suppose, is that I'm going to run this race next week. I suppose. I mean, I'm not sure, but I think so. But what matters to you?
Well, it's funny, you know, I got a reading tonight, and I've been thinking a lot about what I'm going to read, and it's been over a year since my last book came out, and I've been thinking about what my next book project will be, or what I'm going to write next, or what I might create. I guess I think what matters to me the most right now is that I've been lucky enough that some really great people have supported me in my effort to become a writer and become an artist, and people have bought my books, and people have, you know, put me up when I was on tour doing readings, and people have fed me when I was between projects and didn't know what I was doing, and, you know, people have given me little jobs here and there to help keep body and soul together while I try to figure out how to be a writer. And I guess what matters to me is making an effort for those people, for the people who've kind of trusted me to try to make something good, or something useful for the community, or something cathartic, or something that they might enjoy seeing or reading. And I feel like I've been, you know, that I've had some amount of faith invested in me, and I want to make an effort to try to earn it. You know, so I think about whether or not I can write things that are useful, or whether or not I can learn things that make me a better writer, or, you know, how to be humble in the face of, you know, people who've allowed you to kind of like run with your ego as an experiment, essentially, which is a really generous thing for a community to allow and provide. And I think it deserves hard work in return. And so I think about what it would mean to be worthy of that investment, and I fucking try to put on a good show.
So I'm excited about this poetry gig that you've got tonight. What stuff are you going to be reading there?
Well, I wanted to take a bit of a chance, because I'd been spent several readings reading from my old books, and I got invited to this reading called Open Secret, which is kind of an intimate Anglophone thing in the basement of a bar. Everyone knows each other, usually kind of a small, warm crowd. And I thought, I'm going to try to do something new. I'm going to read from a journal that I wrote over Christmas. The whole journal, it's like 170 pages, and the whole journal is a letter to my lover, where I just journaled every day of my trip to her, as a way of sort of inviting her to be there with me and share that experience. Yeah.
Je vais le piler.
Voilà. Full house.
Il a encore du mal à me dire qui.
Paisible demeure-là, bien de la ville, te voilà, pleurant sans cesse.
I am standing next to my pain, my new partner in crime. I think we will do good things together. He speaks of the kindness of strangers. I tell him that it's just our own kindness reflected back at us. He says that doesn't make it not real. Okay, I say. Do you want to get a place together? Go on a trip? I ask him. He says he'll think about it. He doesn't know if he wants to commit to anything. He's unsure if he believes in commitment. You seem pretty committed to being pain, I say. It's hard to change your image, he says. Image exists in other people's minds. You can't change other people's minds too easily these days. Oh, I say. Do you think there's an advantage to being pain, I ask. He says, the world looks beautiful from his eyes, as long as he looks outward and not inward. But that he looks inward, he finds strength, which is beautiful also. Sounds pretty good, I tell him. I'm glad you're my friend, and that you share these things with me. You're pretty wise, Pain. He says he's glad I'm his friend too. Without friends, nothing exists, he says. We make a really good pair. Thank you.
It's been a while since when open mics, palpitations to write a poem, carrying bags of bread, sandwiches saved from the trash, sweating underneath plastic film, soaking in appreciation for a gentle voice, rhythm unique or chopped off lines, an invitation into one girl's erotic, the illusion of freedom unavailable for all, free. Sometimes I'm married, sometimes fill in what you want. Vapor. I fall in love with my own sincerity. Identity as a character in still elusive to myself. What pursuit is she after? What ribbon tethers her truth? Let me switch from you to she to me without or reason, and chop the edges off sentences, punctuated by one speckled detail, artfully artless and now so direct. Magic mushrooms to Atlantis, to window shopping for leather and muslin draped from ceilings 2 stories high. Are you struggling, princess? Are you making anything but a maze on the doll of a Chinatown that only exists as long as the coconut water drips into your imagination? and here again. Another rotation, another deepening fragile. Change and love, uncertain paradox, forever true.
Thank you so much. This is Alison Corner. Please welcome Mr. Jason Stoneking.
All right.
Thank you.
Hi everybody.
Hello.
If you bear with me, I'm going to do something a bit unusual, a bit different from what I've done ever. I'm not going to read from one of my books. I'm going to have this new project in process.
Unveiling it?
Yeah. Thank you, David, by the way, for having me in this kind of place where I feel safe to do the weird and the wacky.
Really good.
Is this the Torah?
It's not, no. But it has to be protected because it's a fragile object. So I've just begun this project where I'm writing one-off books by hand to people. Like I'll take like a 200-page journal and write in it for a month and address it to one particular person and send it to them, and it'll be the only copy that ever exists. Like because I'm kind of interested in the object becoming unique and precious again, rather than just making mass-produced books and everybody reads the same book and all that shit. This is the first one, and I've never I've never copied anything out of it, or typed it, or read from it, or shared it with anybody except the person to whom it was addressed. And so this is sort of handwritten, never before read stuff, which, you know, so this will probably be the only time I read from this particular object. The uncomfortable link between sex and death. Sex as the answer to death, which it is in every way. Sex as a weapon against death and a distraction from it. Somehow thinking about Alzheimer's and cancer screenings and back surgeries has made me want to go lock myself in a room and yank on my dick. Until it stands up and proves to me that new life still pulses through my body, just waiting to be coaxed into eruption by that elusive touch of poetry, of inspiration, of, dare I say, grace, the erotic. Yes, the project of the year, your specialty. The place where artfulness is put directly onto the path of the biggest questions. What makes us want to live in the face of everything, in full obvious view of the ferocious black sky? What makes us want to latch onto each other's naked bodies and set fire to the frantic dancing of each other's cells? Is it merely that procreation buys more time for the species, paying rent on the void as we tumble through it? No, it's absolutely not that simple, because we don't fuck everyone. We don't even want to fuck everyone. We want to fuck some people more than others, and that's because something, Eros, lights the torch, rings the bell, lets us know when it's appropriate to hurl ourselves into the fiery molecular dance against the demons of demise. Of course, some of us may gravitate to more dance partners than others, but not all our dance partners are equally adept at infusing the ritual with all its gravitas, at convincing us even fleetingly that we are dancing to the glorious defeat of death. But you, oh, here is something you never leave any doubt about. You make me feel like the thrusts of my desire are stoking the flames beneath the cauldron of life itself. You make me feel like if I ever stop fucking you, the goddamn cosmos will unravel. You make me feel like there is a fact bigger than the fact of death. Like there is something worth holding on to, worth suffering for, worth facing naked and afraid, worth celebrating even in the flaws of its incarnation. You make me feel like our lovemaking is the very same generative act that drives and justifies everything under the sun and beyond the sun, not a version of it, or a mimicry, or a knockoff, or a performance, but the real thing, the big show, the payoff, the reason for all reasons. I get from you what I've looked for in countless crappy lovers. This is why I think of you as sacred. But maybe this is also somehow at the heart of my jealousy when it arises, that I can't imagine you doing it any other way. I can't imagine you going through the motions, just mechanically satisfying your body or someone else's, playing around distractedly with idle curiosities about toys and props and the bodies of various men as they administer the pleasure of release to your cunt and your cunt alone. No. I imagine that every time you take off your clothes, it is to explore the divine. I imagine it is your heart and not so much your cunt that drives your quest for exploration and release. And maybe that's why I sometimes feel threatened, because I can't picture you showing up halfway. I can only picture you giving your heart and soul to every encounter. I can only imagine you being the person that you are to me. And I don't want to imagine that sacred honor bestowed on some opportunistic guy who has little but a passing curiosity to offer in return. I'm just going to jump ahead. You don't have to mark the pauses. My parents are getting ready to go to breakfast at the diner. Later, when they return, we're going to start picking up the Christmas decorations and carrying them all back up to the attic. There aren't near as many as in previous years, but there's still at least one large box for each room in the house. My mom's always been a big decorator. Holiday-specific and seasonal dishes, tablecloths, coffee cups, hand towels, candles, tissue boxes, throw pillows, and on. If you can think of it, she's probably thought of it. But as my parents get older, they bring fewer and fewer boxes down from the attic. And some of these things are probably being packed up and carried upstairs for the last time. There's a light, unambitious rain drizzling from a thick gray sky outside. It's not very cold or very warm. The past year is behind us, and its celebrations are over, but the coming year has yet to take shape. PLU is already promoting my reading for the end of January, but I haven't even thought about what I might read. You are spending your day wrestling with government paperwork, trying to get your citizenship application on track. My dad spent the morning watching year-end wrap-ups of the professional football season, which teams were out of the playoffs, which players retired, which coaches lost their jobs for failing to deliver results. Maybe it made me wonder what kind of season I've had as a writer. The things that you and I have confronted and tried to work through together are real and vital, true and beautiful, scary, difficult, alive. And that feels so crucial to me right now as I try to look at other things in my life that might be dead or dying or just sliding out of view. I'm thinking about the fragility of my family, and imagining a time when I have nowhere and no one to go back to but can only go forward. I'm trying to consider who I will be when I'm only myself and no longer a part of my original context, no longer a son, no longer an audience for the previous generation's wisdom and values, but only a selective vector for that which I choose to preserve and disseminate. I'm looking around at my childhood home, looking into my parents' eyes and realizing that one day I will no longer have access to the entire library, but only to my partial curation. When we got to Paris, Jesse and I wasted no time in announcing ourselves as the new enfant terrible of poetic terrorism. We howled and fought in the streets, drank staggering quantities of whiskey and stormed poetry readings together. We hijacked other people's art openings and staged elaborate performance pieces in bars and restaurants. We took off our clothes and swam in the Seine. We climbed the renovation scaffolding to the top of Notre Dame to bellow at the moon in the middle of the night. Wherever we went, we introduced ourselves as saints or celebrities. We lived like mad, homeless kings, and nothing ever got in the way enough to discourage us. We found lovers and benefactors, places to sleep, eat, and drink ourselves full. We published volumes of our poems and carried them around town, commanding people to buy them and making examples of those who didn't. Eventually, we milked our angry, insolent youth for everything it was worth. We gave our middle fingers to the world until it bored us, and then we looked around to find that we were not yet either famous or dead. Some years had gone by, but we hadn't achieved the widespread notoriety that we'd envisioned as the natural reward for our service on the front lines of verse. Our signal flares of screaming irreverence had shot up into the black void and come back down to earth again without the gods taking notice. It was a bit like waking up hungover after the best night of your life and having to sift back through the fragmented events in your memory, trying to determine how great the night had really been or how much you might have blown it out of proportion. That was about my first few weeks in Paris.